Hello, everyone. I am Heather Kuldell-Ware. I am the former editor-in-chief of GovExec, and I'm excited to guide this next panel. I know we're cutting your lunch a little bit short, but I hope you'll join us in a very fascinating conversation about challenges in federal cybersecurity, specifically visibility. As agencies modernize and adopt more distributed systems, getting a clear, unified view of cyber risk has become increasingly difficult. Breaking down silos and improving coordination across government is essential for faster threat detection and better decision making. I have a really amazing panel here to discuss this with me, and we are going to be discussing what's working, where agencies are still facing hurdles, and some of the lessons they've learned trying to do this. I have Jessie Posilkin, Acting Director of the Technology Modernization Fund at GSA. Mayuresh Ektare, VP of Product Management at Qualys. TraudLinde Clark, CISO of a DOJ component. And Renata Spinks, former CISO and Deputy CIO at IC4, US Marine Corps, and now CEO of CyberSec International. She has the most acronyms in her title, so let's give them a warm welcome, everybody. All right, first, Jessie, I'm going to pick on you. Can you tell the audience, briefly introduce yourself and tell the audience how you work with federal visibility?
Sure. Hi, all. As Heather said, I'm Jessie Posilkin. I'm the acting executive director of the Technology Modernization Fund. And for those who are not familiar, TMF invests as a revolving fund in projects across government on a number of issues, but in particular have historically and will continue to focus on cybersecurity. So we get to see projects that are interested in, and agencies that are interested in launching cybersecurity projects, and maybe at different levels of maturity, and then ideally help to get them to another side of it. So yeah, happy to talk more about it.
Mayuresh, your turn.
Certainly. Mayuresh Ektare, VP of Products at Qualys. I really wanted to just touch upon the lack of visibility thereof, where we see solutions that are trying to detect risks across the different parts of the infrastructure. And that is where the concept of a risk operations center sort of was born. And I'll definitely try to touch upon how visibility can be improved by adopting some of these philosophies in the public sector and the federal sector.
TraudLinde.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So I am, as it says here, CISO at one of the DOJ components, and obviously my job is cybersecurity. But what we do there in part of federal visibility is not only share among the DOJ components, but we try to share outside of the DOJ components because we are just one small little lens. And the coverage we have under my area is pretty much everything from inception to A&A work to cyber operations to risk operations to all of that. So it's our responsibility to share everything across the components because what affects one may affect all of us. And believe it or not, a lot of the components may not share amongst each other. So what I try to do is, build those bridges and, demolish those silos.
Renata.
Hey, so I am now the CEO of CyberSec International, but before that, for about 6 years, I served in different capacities within the Marine Corps, and since we've already introduced the alphabet soup to that title, I won't go there. However, visibility and cybersecurity was part of my role as the Chief Information Security Officer for the Marine Corps. And then for C4, that was a component, but we also have multiple components, just like my friends on the panel. And what we like to focus on, the necessity of visibility, but it was truly how we got visibility, and understanding where there's already in place systems versus newer systems coming online. And then how we did that from a visibility perspective and decision making. So that was what was important then. And I've carried that over into my company now. And then how do we do better with information exchange, not information sharing? And that means not just information amongst our components, but our allies as well. And so we are in a global warfare when it comes to cyber. It's not going to reduce. The landscape is going to continue to increase. So that's what CyberSec International is focusing on, and it dovetails off of all of my career of getting visibility and knowing what to do and how to do.
Now, before we get too far into this conversation, I would love to just make sure we're on the same page of visibility. Renata, I'm going to stick with you. How do you define visibility, and what do we really mean when we say that, and why is it such a challenge?
So for us, we had this thing called petito in the Marine Corps. It was people's idea and things in that order. Mm-hmm. And so if you think about petito, visibility can be technical, which is great. We all have tools that can give us a lot of visibility on the network. But I think for us, visibility was more about the people. We always knew that everything starts with people. Mm-hmm. And whether that was training personnel on a new tool or a new feature, or making sure our operators had what they need. But it was also visibility at some of the most desolate and degraded locations, and then making sure that that visibility was as accurate as possible. Real-time data, not something that takes 2 months to come together, and then we do an anatomy of attack report, and by that time, the bad guys gotten even better. So visibility from a people perspective was our number one priority, because if we didn't get that part right, then everything else was kind of a domino effect of ineffective leadership, in my opinion. So that's what I mean when I say visibility. What's happening on my endpoints? Most people rarely ask that question. Most questions that I saw leadership asking was, is the network up? Right?
Yeah.
Not really, but what's happening at the endpoints? What are you seeing? Hey, call over there to Miranda at DOJ and ask her, what's her team seeing? Rarely did you hear that kind of conversation. And so we were those conversation starters within the Department of Defense, creating those blueprints of, if you don't have your infrastructure in place to handle what you're seeing from an incident response perspective, then if you don't have the right tool that can automate a lot of the redundancy that's happening from a people perspective, then you're going to get burnout, you're going to get mistakes, and that means your zero trust is pretty accurate because the bad guy's already in there.
That kind of made me ended on kind of a sad note there, but
yeah, sorry.
TraudLinde, what is your version of visibility? Similar?
It's very similar. I can touch more on the challenges, though, as you guys know, in the federal government. It's, some folks are on the high side, some folks are on the low side. You got these legacy applications that are still on Windows 95. Then you have some other stuff that's doing DevSecOps and containers and AI and ML, and they just can't talk to each other. So even though it's possible from a people perspective, sometimes we can't even share it outside of email unless we get into rooms like this and just say, hey, tell me what's going on, or hey, what did you see today, or what LinkedIn article did you read, and share that information. So that's, to us, information sharing is one thing, but that actual exchange of what has to happen is critical, because in some cases it just doesn't. And like she said, we'll have folks dwelling in our environment for a long time and we just don't know it.
Mayuresh, you're nodding a lot. Did you want to add something?
No, absolutely. Just to build upon what you mentioned there, visibility is not just about sharing, but it is also about normalizing the data. Because taking into consideration visibility that is emerging from different parts of your infrastructure, how do you really centralize it and put that under a single pane of glass to have a very coordinated treatment for that risk, right? But this really requires normalization so that all of your tools are really speaking the same language of risk.
Mm-hmm. Jessie, did you want to weigh in? They got it covered.
I think they got it covered, but if I can turn it into a little bit of I think someone right before this asked me actually about what policymakers need to know and think about when it comes to this stuff. And I think what Renata started on is something that I think about a lot at the Technology Modernization Fund, and I think we are probably all navigating, which is, how do you have policymakers who may not be technical, not see this as the domain of like those people over there in the corner wearing their very cool Nikes, but which is great, but and with great hair, and right, I'm thinking of from the armed AFRL, she's so cool, and she wears those high Converse boots, right? So anyway, there's like this cool world of cybersecurity, and actually making clear that that as policymakers, you need to be asking more than, is the network up, and need to be actually quite involved in the conversations to help design systems and implement tools that are helping your particular policy aims, whatever they are. So at TMF, we're seeing projects, at a place like Department of State, where I think it's a little more clear the kinds of adversaries you're dealing with. But the Bureau of Land Management and Mining, it turns out like there is a whole world there too of security that needs to happen. And if you're thinking about and having policymakers who may be land use experts also asking questions about what kind of security and tools you need, I think it can really shift the conversation to making sure that then people are covered instead of just, do we have the most sophisticated tool possible?
I'm actually going to keep picking on you for a moment. From your seat at TMF, how are agencies using modernization dollars to close those visibility gaps? Are there projects that have worked really well? Are there places where we're falling short?
Yes, to all of it. And I think we're in a really interesting moment too, in which we also, we are seeing staffing changes across the government. And it feels really important, even more so, that we are thinking about using those dollars for staff to help manage some of the projects, right? Like, you cannot automate away all of the work that needs to happen here. There's more that should be automated. I'm not in disagreement on that front, but I think that part's really important. So actually, to pick on my Department of State team for a minute, yeah, we have an investment there where they, along with GSA and a number of other folks, were doing all of the basics of zero trust implementation. And we're seeing now some other agencies be concerned, well, that happened in the last 4 years. Do we need to end that work because it happened in the prior 4 years? And I think being really clear that this work is not political, and in fact is necessary, sort of regardless of politics, our networks are under attack, and we have really important work to do from both internal and external adversaries to take care of the really sensitive data that we have. And I think that's I guess I am on a soapbox, I'm up here, but that feels really important. So the Department of State is one, DHS is another that did a lot of, they were in the information sharing, maybe not information exchange world, I'm sorry, Renata, but they did also use TMF dollars to make a really big investment to be sharing information in a much more sophisticated way than they had before, which again is both a technical challenge, but also a human one. And I think both of those teams have done a really nice job of navigating the human and technical side of it.
Mayuresh, are you seeing things across agencies where there's a common thing that agencies are trying to close specific gaps on?
What we definitely see from a visibility perspective is, how do you provide centralized visibility while enabling autonomy? This is one of the challenges that most organizations, whether commercial or public sector, actually face, right? Where you have independent agencies, state, local governments, oftentimes making independent decisions, but the visibility is expected at the leadership level across all the systems, right? And that gap really is hard to fill. Oftentimes, it all starts with, do I have the visibility of an asset? And the asset is fine, that's just a starting point. The risks on top of those assets are really important, and those are fragmented all over the place. So we definitely see the need for having this decoupled systems to sort of work together to provide that centralized visibility across the organization.
All right, Renata, I'm going to pick on you now. From your experience at the Marine Corps and now in the private sector, what kinds of organizational and cultural barriers do you see that make threat information sharing, and your preferred term, exchange, difficult?
In the cultural perspective, I think where we can kind of forget is where we came from or where we're coming from, which is about 10 to 15 years of me learning how to operate within an environment that I have a whole lot of control over. I'm a lot of on-premise, not to date myself, I'm not that old, but I'm also not that young. And when I came up from a programming perspective, I was talking to engineers and asking people to do workarounds on my infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Well, now I've moved to the cloud. I can't just call up my cloud service provider and say, well, you know what, can we reroute from one hop to another hop? And then when you do that, I need you to cloak it. And then you just can't, right? And so I think the challenge is we have to give people some grace when it comes to the systemic challenge that we have in modernization, information sharing, you name it. Culturally, we have to understand that we're coming from a shift in dynamics that no one really could fathom or think about. We talked about it, but we didn't really know what it looked like. And so I think we have to understand that and have a little bit of empathy from the leadership perspective, as well as understanding that there are hierarchicals throughout the government. It's not just DoD military, but if it's the CIO, rarely do you hear the CIO talking to a GS5 or a 9. I think that is a gap. I think that is a missed opportunity to get better. And so how do we have a cultural shift of, in my world, from Marine Corps perspective, we would have a captain or a lieutenant or a young enlisted giving the intel brief to the general. Almost unheard of. When I would say that to people, they would be like, really? Briefing the general, the 4-star, the 3-star? Absolutely. Not just because I need to cultivate that talent management, a whole nother briefing, okay?
That's a different
whole nother
panel,
topic. But being able to communicate across a culture that's very hierarchical. You're not supposed to talk to the general. You're not supposed to talk to the CIO. Missed opportunities. And so how do you impact that? You have to be an example. You have to be the door opener, not the gatekeeper, right? As far as intel space, yes, we can't share everything and we can't exchange everything. But I will tell you that where there are opportunities to either use from an automated perspective, and I know there's a barrier there because we aren't always using the same systems. And quite honestly, we don't always have the same values or outcomes in mind that each other should be. We want to, because they're our allies, but those are just some truth. So I summarize my answer by saying it is hard. It is very difficult. And so we have to be very careful and stay side by side by the security operators and the networkers to kind of tell us what's really going on, what are you really seeing? But I'm going to say something that people are going to grasp. They're going to be like, she said that? Yeah, you got to have some policymakers and you got to have the lawyers in the room. You got to have legal. Because we want all these great things as a technologist. I want to information share and exchange. I want to bring that feature into this space as a pilot, even though you don't have the authority to test or operate. Yeah, you don't think the RMF process is valuable because it takes too long. I get all that. But we also have some reasons why bureaucracy and gatekeeping is in place. So it's a balance, and yes, it's hard, and that's why we all have to continue to show up in one role or another. To help us all keep this cybersecurity war fight, because it doesn't go away. It just gets worse and worse. Because it's all about the data.
Yep. TraudLinde, you had a very knowing nod as she was talking.
Yes.
Familiar to your ears?
It's actually very familiar, and it's kind of very refreshing to hear about the GS5s briefing the 4-star generals, because where I'm at, I'm the CISO, but I'm also the acting deputy CIO and the acting CIO. So I'm used to being a little further down the line, and now I'm up here. But I have folks briefing me like, no, like unit chief, section chief, I love you, but I need your SME to tell me what's going on, right? I don't need the bureaucratic answer. I need to know how bad it really is, right? I need someone to tell me ish is about to hit the fan and I need to do something about it. And, a lot of times that culture, the unit section chiefs or whatever you want to call them are afraid to tell you bad news. And I'm afraid to tell you bad news doesn't get better with time, right? You have to act on a lot of stuff and you have to change that culture. And we as leaders have to change the fact that it's okay to tell me that you failed. It's okay that you're about to tell me bad news, but don't come to me and just be the guy or gal that complains. Come to me with what you think is a solution because you're close to it. And that's really important to tell that information so we can actually act on it.
And Jessie, you were also nodding. Do these sound like familiar problems?
Yeah, no, it all sounds familiar. I'm thinking about a story. So one of our investments is with login.gov. And that's, I think, an example where, the Department of Labor has used login and states are using it. And that's exactly the kind of moment where having much more active communication, it's not quite the same bureaucracy, but I think there is a perception in the world of like states versus federal government, you should not bring all of those risks up. And actually you have to in order for products and systems to mature and to deal with the kinds of threats that we actually may not be seeing on a federal level because of the way benefits are administered, but at a state level, the threats are really different and the types of users are really different. And so it becomes even more important. So I think that kind of partnership where we're investing in both systems and users to make sure that that communication loop happened, and then they managed towards some really tricky risks. I think otherwise you just can't do that. And you also can't do that without the lawyers in the room is another thing that really, at GSA, if I could tout our great general counsel's team, they actually have a section all for legal technologists so that the lawyers that we deal with are familiar with the kinds of questions and topics that we are bringing to them on a regular basis. They may not actually have been technologists in a past life, but they understand that this is the world that they need to grasp, and therefore are willing to ask more questions, and meant that we ask them more questions more often because they were fun to bring into the room to say, there are a few different ways we could proceed here, help advise us, which similar to usually lawyers are only getting involved when things have really gone bad.
Yeah.
And it's a much easier conversation to say nothing's wrong. We'd like to make sure nothing goes wrong. Help us manage the risk here. And having those kinds of open conversations with people who are credible made a big difference towards that.
I'm hearing a very crowded room. I'm hearing the subject matter experts, the
Yes.
leadership, the policymakers, the lawyers. Everybody's got to be in there, and everybody's got to be willing to hear bad news. How hard is that? Anyone?
It's a big conference room,
Yeah.
though. We have chairs on the backside of the
It's like
wall.
this.
There's a chair right there. Yeah, it is hard. I think the trophy of leadership goes to that person in the room that's steering. Again, the hierarchical works to your benefit then. For us in the Marine Corps, you had a 3 or a 4-star sitting at the head of that table, and to his left and right was his OPSO, and right. So you kind of walked in the room and you kind of knew. I probably shouldn't say that, should I, Ed? You know your place by where you're sitting at the table. I shouldn't say that, but you kind of sort of know how that hierarchy is going to go. And it is hard conversations, but Heather, I want to switch it. I want to shift everyone because people, we get up here on these stages and we just act like it was all so easy and it was just great and wonderful. And I have high energy, so that makes it even worse, right? But the real question is, why do we have cultural barriers? Why do we need legal in the room? It is fear. We have all experienced leadership by fear. I am afraid that not only am I going to be held accountable for this decision that I made, the best decision at the time I had that information, that was the best decision that I was making at that time. And maybe it doesn't work out for us, and maybe the bad guy's a little bit more sophisticated, and we get to experience something bad happening. And instead of I understand all the pressure you're under every day with 7 hats every time you come into the workplace, I understand that you got kids at home in the midst of COVID, and now you got elderly people. You got all this happening because we're all human beings sitting in leadership roles, but you still have to be perfect. Yeah. And since you weren't, I'm going to fire you. I'm not going to give you, all these bad things are going in our head of what if I make a mistake? And so that's why we have cultural barriers. And unfortunately, those barriers haven't right now gotten better. Actually, some of us probably have the position that we are experiencing fear in leadership now. And so I think the answer to that, as best as we can, have to band together, have opportunities where we have these kinds of conversations, and then figure out how do we get past it, because fear is a blocker. And I'm talking now and it's scary, right? People may not want to talk to me after I leave here, and I have a contractual company, right? But it happens. I am a believer in the faith, and I know that everything happens for a reason, but we have to figure out where's the silver lining and skirt across it as best as we can. But we also have to truly acknowledge that we make it sound like it's so easy to say, hey, legal, can you tell me how to avoid this problem? Really, it's not, because I'm scared that the attorney is getting ready to give me 50 jillion things I got to do, and I got to move out. I don't have time to wait on your legality and your opinion. And so, again, it's a symphony and it's balance. And I had the distinct honor of serving under leadership that moved out and accepted risk, and they took the hits. And I truly understand that in the environment that we are in today, it can be unprecedented and all the things, But even if I was still in the building, I know that there are leaders that are sitting at the tables now that they're juggling a lot of stuff that's coming at them. And we have to understand that it may be bureaucracy, it could be cultural barriers, but they're walking in there as human beings every day, and in the back of their minds, they're not trying to get the axe either. And so we have to consider all that. While I just wanted to take a moment to just acknowledge that.
Yeah, so that's going to be a hard act to follow. So I'm going to put the pressure on you, Mayuresh. We've talked a lot about culture and people, and which is obviously a key part. But like from a product and innovation lens, how can we enable better federated visibility? Like where do you see what's fixing things and where are we falling short?
Certainly. While people and processes are equally important, from a technology perspective, without the data coming in, there's no visibility. Now, in our SOC environments, we have been successfully able to aggregate that data from a log perspective, right? Logging data is obviously aggregated somewhere that goes into a SIM solution for enabling a SOC. It's easier when you consider aggregating the time series based log data, because it all looks the same across all the technologies, right? What is really challenging though is when you start thinking about risk signals. These risk signals across your tool sets are going to be diverse, are going to be very isolated and independent. The challenge is, if you ask around the room, how many of the folks actually have implemented a cybersecurity data lake? You'll see a lot of hands that might rise. Now, implementing a cybersecurity data lake is really hard, because you have got diverse set of vendors, their APIs keep changing, their data models keep changing, and you are at the mercy of these APIs to pull in the data on a daily basis, stitch it all together to provide that visibility that everyone is expecting, right? This technology challenge really has to be solved on the proactive risk management side. The reactive part is well taken care of in the SOC today, but the proactive risk management is unaddressed. And this is where products like Qualys can actually pitch in to provide that centralized visibility across the diverse attack surface that exists today.
All right, Jessie, I'm going to pick on you because you sit in a cross-agency seat, right? Tell us, can you share a success story of actual cross-agency collaboration that improved threat detection and response? What made it work? What lessons? Everyone get their pens ready.
I stole my answer for this and used it before around the Department of Labor and login, because to me that was one where I think, to Renata's point, everyone had to admit that something was not working in order to address it, right? Like that had to be the premise, and that was not the time to then suddenly fire everyone. That would not go great because then there would be no one to actually address the problem. So I think understanding that tension, the world was changing and therefore there was going to be threats, I think really matter. I think the other kinds of collaboration, to your point, that I've really appreciated is we, for a long time, ran a Zero Trust working group, but not just any working group, but a working group of agencies all at the same points in their journey, all making investments in Zero Trust and Zero Trust tools. And so I think, to me, that's what I want. And I'm optimistic, actually, that TMF is going to start working towards more, is how do we make sure that agencies are having, to your point, I think there are parts of this that are technical, but a lot of it is also needing to be humans in rooms to actually talk to each other about some of the early risks they're seeing and early concerns they're having. Right, ones without, although I love a camera, without the cameras in the room, so that you can really get to the heart of the issue. And I think that's the concern I have for right now, is I want to be sure, as we're seeing staffing reductions across government, that we're also making sure that leadership and CISOs and others are able to have the capacity to talk to one another and not just deal with what's happening at their agency, because the more staff reductions we have, obviously, I think a lot is getting concentrated in terms of the workload. Understandable, but then it really limits our ability to have conversations and to encourage, whether they're TMF investments or appropriations from Congress, it really limits the ability to have those conversations in the way that you need.
TraudLinde, do you have examples at your agency of that cross-agency work?
Yep. So obviously, as part of a DOJ component, right, we have 40 some DOJ components underneath it. So when something happens to one of us, it typically filters down in some way, and we all find out about it. But one in particular was my component had a cyber incident that was identified by another agency outside of the DOJ family. And it was only identified because of some sharing we had done with other agencies. And they finally got back to us, they let us know about it, and we remediated it. But then it built a partnership because they were willing to sit with us, and nobody really cared who found it or how they found it. My group was awesome, and they were just like, all right, just tell us how to fix it. Tell us what you did so we can check all the other systems. And then I passed it on to the other DOJ components, and I was like, hey guys, check your stuff and whatnot. And so it became it's very informal, which is unfortunate. But they do call us when they're like, hey, we see something interesting over here with the Marine Corps. Y'all want to know about it? And we're like, yes. But it makes it easier to share that because it was no egos. It was no silos, right? We just wanted to address the incident because, again, all of us care about defending our systems, our companies, our nation, all those pieces. But it was easier because we sat down and we're like, okay, let's just fix it.
Did it used to be, I feel like when I first started covering federal IT, that would have felt like, years ago, that would have felt like an accusation, like something's going on in your network. What changed to make it not be like that?
Honestly, it's the way, and this is gonna sound very toot horny, but it's not. It's the way I approach stuff, right? Mm-hmm. My job as a federal CISO is to protect my agency and the data and the nation. Right? Mm-hmm. It is not my job to have an ego. It is my job to fix it. Mm-hmm. So I was once told, by an awesome boss that I had, that a decision you make today, if it's wrong, I can't unscrew it on Friday. So make the decision, sit and do it. If they didn't want me to collaborate with the other agency, okay, I'll take the hand slap and I'll protect my team and maybe not do it again. Just depends. But they appreciated that now we get more information, even though it's informally. But it's having folks like myself in the room and Renata in the room and Jessie in the room to say it's okay to tell me something bad, and I don't care. I just need you to fix it.
Mm-hmm. The fix is more important than the ego.
Yes.
Outcomes. Outcomes.
Did you want to weigh in on that, Renata?
Yeah, I think we have to concentrate on outcomes. And, like I said, it's not easy to get in the room and deliver bad news.
No.
But I think we've all had an experience where we were afraid and very hesitant to give some bad news. But you walked out of there, you may not have been unscathed. I've had some times when I've had some experiences. It's like, whoa, that was a lot. But you grow from it. We get better, and it's all about outcomes and the nation's security. If you have an ego, it's very hard to say you're going to be a leader if you have an ego. If you take it, someone said the other day, oh, Renata, you always tell people don't take it personally. It really isn't personal. Mm-hmm. You should take it nationally. If you want to take it somewhere, take it nationally. Do not take it personally, because I guarantee you, those zeros and ones that's penetrating your network, they do not even care who you are, what you do. They don't care. All they care about is reputational damage, economic instability, instigating fear, and making the American public lose trust and faith in their government. That's what they care about. They don't care about Renata. They don't care. They care about your identity and your credentials, right? And so I think we have to, as leaders and those who are contributing to the federal space, we just have to understand that. And it's not something that, collaboration, yes, we have some parameters we have to color in the lines with, but there's also some times where information sharing, information exchange benefits. I think it's gotten easier, to your question. Mm-hmm. I think it's gotten easier because the exposure of vulnerabilities and successful breaches has now been all over the news, and it's shown an effect of more than one agency. It's not just, I penetrated the GSA. It is, we've had Log4j, SolarWinds, we've had the Colonial Pipeline. And it's like, if you don't think we're all in this fight together, you are not present, right? So I think that's what's made it easier to have that conversation. I think it's become easier because we are starting to, my experience, and I couch it when I say this, I have watched from 2008 to 9 policymakers and lawmakers to now, I have seen a pendulum shift of being able to tell congressional and senatorial personnel the truth. I've watched that in my career. Mm-hmm. I used to be as a GS-7-9 like, oh, I never want to testify to Congress. Oh, I never want to. But I've seen a tolerance level and a shift in being able to have those conversations. Now, you got to have some expertise. You can't just go in there and give them fluff, right?
Yeah.
But I think there's an appetite of leadership that we've seen where you can share some bad news, and you can also share, like Jessie said a few minutes ago, you can also share an opposite thought process. Your perspective can be different. That's okay. We don't innovate if everyone's thinking the same.
So I'm going to keep with you, but we're going to come down the line for this one, so everyone pay attention. Looking ahead, how should agencies define and measure success when it comes to visibility? Renata first. Everyone else can think on their answers.
I think if you don't have visibility with certainty, and I mean certainty, I mean you know what's happening on your network, at the endpoints, in real time, not yesterday, not the day before yesterday, I mean in real time. That is how you can measure success in your network. You can tell the health of your network by how quickly you can attain the information, how quickly you can respond, because an incident is gonna occur. But most importantly, how fast do you learn and make a different mistake the next time? I think that's for me is what we can do in the future.
I like that, making different mistakes. TraudLinde.
I mean, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over again and expecting a different result, which is a lot of what we do, right? We do the incident response, activities and the contingency activities, and it's like, great, I walked through another thing again. Looking ahead, you have to have different people. You have to have different perspectives. You have to put the egos away. Like, I hate to harp on egos over and over and over again, but silos and egos just prevent anything from growing, and it perpetuates the problem. We have to, I know a government person saying it, but you have to modernize, right? Windows 95 actually still exists out there in some cases, and they think because it's in a corner somewhere that it's totally fine and it's safe, or they have Windows 7 and Vista, or they have these things that they've just lifted into the cloud and they think it's great, or they buy these widgets and tools, but they don't know how to integrate them. Right? You have to have that expertise. You have to have the understanding. You have to have a little bit of the bureaucracy and the understanding that an 80% solution is okay as long as the 20% isn't a big gaping hole in your environment. But 80% is enough. Figure it out, assess it, determine is that where you need to go. And if it is, you adjust as you go. You don't try to get 100% right away. And if you don't do those things, the actor is going to be in your environment just forever.
Mayuresh.
Certainly. Yeah, the way to measure visibility would be from an outcome perspective, right? Visibility, like Sumit was mentioning earlier this morning, right? Taking a selfie with a dashboard doesn't get you anywhere, right? It's really about what is the action that you can derive out of that visibility, and remediation or mitigating or putting compensating controls in place. Those are the actions that can be driven out of the visibility that you get, right? And so the only metric that really matters the most is how much risk reduction has been achieved. And that would be the only lens that can be used to actually measure the effectiveness of this visibility.
Jessie, final word, no pressure.
I had no notes. I want to just double click whatever Renata said is where I am, I think. But no, I think that's exactly right. That if you only get one question and you only have one news story, I think it's how fast can you see what's happening on your network, and that to be able to ask that of any TMF investment for any congressperson, to be able to ask that of the agencies they oversee, to me feels like the right single metric if you get one.
Well, thank you all for being such wonderful panelists. Let's give them a little round of applause here, folks.